If you move, you're dead! But I'm a war hero.
The young police officer slammed the elderly black veteran face first against the hood of the truck while screaming, "Get on your knees before I put you down." Traffic stopped instantly across the highway. Drivers jumped out holding phones. One woman started crying in her car watching the old man struggle to breathe beneath the officer's gun. And while dozens of strangers recorded the humiliation happening in broad daylight, nobody realized the trembling old veteran pinned against the police truck had once commanded soldiers in war zones overseas. But less than 15 minutes later, military sirens approaching down the highway would make every police officer on that road step backward in complete silence. Before we begin, comment your city and what time it is right now, because this story starts with public humiliation so brutal that people standing in traffic thought they were watching an execution unfold on the side of the road. It happened during a scorching afternoon outside Houston. Construction blocked half the highway. Tempers were already exploding. Police were stopping cars aggressively after reports of armed suspects nearby. And when an elderly black man driving an old pickup truck accidentally crossed slightly over a lane marker beside a young officer's motorcycle, one officer decided fear, power, and humiliation mattered more than patience, dignity, or truth. The afternoon sun burned across the Texas highway, while rows of slow-moving traffic stretched endlessly beneath heat rising off the asphalt in shimmering waves. Construction barriers narrowed the lanes tightly, while frustrated drivers inched forward, bumper to bumper, beside orange cones and flashing warning signs. Horns sounded occasionally in the distance, while police cruisers monitored traffic near the shoulder. Inside an old, faded dark green pickup truck, 73-year-old Walter Hayes drove carefully, with both hands steady on the wheel. The truck rattled softly every few seconds from age, but Walter kept it clean and maintained despite the years. Old military stickers remained faded near the back window, while a folded American flag rested carefully behind the passenger seat. Walter himself looked tired but disciplined. Gray beard, calm eyes, weathered skin shaped by decades of hard experience. The kind of face people respected immediately, if they actually looked closely enough. Walter slowed slightly near the construction merge lane when another car suddenly cut sharply in front of him, forcing his truck briefly across the painted divider line beside a police motorcycle unit parked near the shoulder. The mistake lasted less than 2 seconds, but it was enough. Officer Brandon Keller snapped his head upward immediately after seeing the old pickup drift slightly across the line. Young, aggressive, recently transferred into highway patrol. The kind of officer who treated every stop like a test of authority. Keller immediately started his motorcycle and accelerated hard beside the truck before flipping on bright, flashing lights. Several nearby drivers instantly slowed down while Walter calmly signaled and pulled onto the shoulder beneath the blazing sunlight. Inside the police radio, Keller already sounded aggressive before even reaching the window. Suspicious vehicle failing lane control. Walter quietly lowered the driver's side window and placed both hands visibly on the steering wheel before the officer even approached. But Keller arrived, already angry. "License!" he barked immediately. Walter looked up calmly. "Good afternoon, officer." Keller ignored the greeting completely. "I said license and registration." Nearby traffic slowed visibly now, while several drivers openly stared toward the stop beside the construction zone. Walter slowly reached toward the glove compartment, exactly the careful way black drivers learn to move around armed officers. Slow hands, no sudden motion. But the moment Walter leaned slightly toward the passenger side, Keller's entire posture changed instantly. "Hey!" The officer suddenly drew his weapon in one violent motion. "Don't move!" The entire highway shoulder froze instantly beneath the sound of Keller screaming, with his pistol aimed directly at Walter through the open driver's side window. Nearby traffic slowed even harder now, while several drivers immediately grabbed phones after seeing the weapon drawn. "Put your hands up," Keller shouted. Walter instantly raised both trembling hands beside the steering wheel. "Officer, don't reach for anything." The old veteran's breathing became uneven now beneath the crushing public tension surrounding the stop. Heat shimmered around the truck, while bright police lights reflected violently across the side mirror and windshield. Another patrol unit quickly arrived behind Keller's motorcycle after hearing the escalation over radio traffic. Officer Melissa Grant stepped out cautiously before immediately noticing the gun already pointed at the elderly driver. "Brandon, what happened?" Keller kept the weapon locked on Walter's chest. "He reached." Walter stared at the barrel pointed inches from his face. "I was getting my registration." Keller screamed again, "Get out of the vehicle!" Several people now openly stood beside stopped traffic, recording the confrontation from phones. One woman shouted from her car window, "He's an old man." Keller ignored everything except Walter. "On your knees, now!" Walter slowly stepped out of the truck beneath blazing heat while keeping both hands visible in the air. His knees visibly shook from age as much as fear. "Please," he said softly, "I'm trying to cooperate." Keller moved closer aggressively with the gun still aimed directly at him. "Kneel down!" The humiliation became total now. Public, violent, dehumanizing. Drivers watched openly while traffic backed up farther down the highway behind flashing lights. Walter slowly lowered himself toward the burning asphalt with visible pain in his joints. One hand instinctively moved slightly toward his lower back from stiffness. Keller immediately screamed again, "Don't move!" The old veteran froze instantly. Melissa Grant looked increasingly uncomfortable now. "Brandon," she muttered quietly, "he's complying." But Keller's adrenaline had already taken control of the entire scene. Walter knelt painfully on the scorching roadside pavement while Officer Keller kept the gun trained directly at his head beneath flashing police lights. The image itself looked horrifying beside the crowded highway. An elderly black man in work clothes kneeling publicly while armed officers towered above him in front of dozens of recording strangers. Cars barely moved now. People openly stood outside vehicles filming. The atmosphere no longer looked like a traffic stop. It looked like public punishment. Walter's breathing became heavier beneath the heat and humiliation. Sweat rolled slowly down the side of his face while gravel pressed painfully into his knees. "Please," he said quietly again, "I serve this country." Keller scoffed immediately. "Everybody says that." The sentence spread through the crowd like gasoline hitting fire. Several bystanders immediately reacted angrily. "What the hell? He's an old man. Put the gun down." Melissa Grant stepped closer toward Keller now. "Brandon, lower the weapon." But Keller refused. "Not until I clear the vehicle." Walter remained kneeling motionless beside the truck while phones recorded every humiliating second from every angle imaginable. Then suddenly another officer near the 2nd Patrol Unit shouted loudly toward Keller. "Hey!" Keller glanced over briefly without lowering the gun. The officer held up something pulled from inside Walter's truck. An old military jacket covered in combat medals resting across the passenger seat. Silence hit instantly. Even Keller's expression shifted slightly for the first time. The officer continued staring at the jacket. "This guy's military." Walter slowly closed his eyes briefly. Tired, exhausted, humiliated beyond words now. Keller still didn't lower the weapon completely. That doesn't mean anything, but the certainty inside his voice had already cracked. Melissa Grant carefully approached the truck while another officer held the military jacket fully open beneath the bright Texas sunlight. Medals lined the chest, combat ribbons, service patches. A folded flag rested beneath the seat beside official military paperwork partially visible inside a leather folder. Traffic beside the highway had nearly stopped completely now, while dozens of people continued recording the scene openly. Melissa slowly opened the folder. Her face changed instantly. Oh my God. Keller looked irritated now more than aggressive. What? Melissa stared silently at the documents several more seconds before looking directly toward Walter, still kneeling on the pavement. Sir, her voice softened immediately. You served in the Marines? Walter nodded slowly without lifting his eyes. 34 years. Complete silence spread across the roadside. Melissa looked back toward Keller sharply. Brandon, she held up the paperwork now. This man's a retired command sergeant major. Several nearby bystanders visibly reacted hearing that. One truck driver standing near the shoulder muttered quietly, Jesus Christ. Keller finally lowered the gun slightly now, but embarrassment immediately replaced aggression across his face. Because suddenly everyone watching the stop saw the same thing clearly. An elderly decorated black veteran forced onto his knees at gunpoint beside a highway while strangers recorded him like a criminal. Walter slowly looked up toward Keller for the first time since kneeling. His voice remained calm somehow. Can I stand now? The question crushed the atmosphere completely because the old man wasn't angry, wasn't screaming, wasn't threatening anyone. He simply sounded tired, deeply tired. Melissa immediately stepped forward, trying to help him up carefully from the pavement. But before Walter fully stood, distant sirens suddenly echoed from farther down the highway. Not police sirens, different, louder, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Every officer on the roadside turned simultaneously toward the sound, approaching from behind the traffic jam. Several black military SUVs suddenly appeared weaving through stopped vehicles, while drivers moved aside instinctively. American flags mounted beside the vehicles reflected beneath blazing sunlight as the convoy accelerated directly toward the traffic stop. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Even bystanders filming became quieter, now sensing something larger arriving. Keller stared toward the convoy in confusion, while Melissa already looked nervous. The first military SUV stopped hard beside the shoulder. Then another, then another. Uniformed military officers stepped out rapidly beneath the Texas heat, with visible urgency in every movement. One older colonel immediately spotted Walter standing shakily beside the truck. His face changed completely. Sergeant Major Hayes? Walter nodded once quietly. The colonel looked toward the police officers surrounding him, then toward the gravel marks still visible on Walter's knees from the pavement. What happened here? Nobody answered immediately, because now every officer understood the scene looked catastrophic from the outside. Keller finally attempted to speak. Routine traffic stop escalated. The colonel's eyes hardened instantly. At gunpoint? Complete silence. Traffic remained frozen while dozens of civilians recorded everything happening. One of the military officers gently steadied Walter by the arm after noticing his knees shaking from the forced kneeling position. The colonel looked directly toward Keller again. Do you have any idea who this man is? Keller stayed silent now, because suddenly his earlier confidence had vanished completely. The entire roadside scene transformed emotionally now. Earlier, the public tension focused on Walter as a perceived threat. Now every eye turned toward the officers instead. Drivers stood silently near their vehicles watching military personnel surround the elderly veteran with immediate respect, while the police officers looked increasingly trapped inside public shame. The colonel carefully removed Walter's dusty military jacket from the truck and handed it respectfully back toward him. Sir, he said quietly, are you all right? Walter looked toward the highway where dozens of strangers still recorded the stop. I'll survive. The answer somehow hurt more than anger would have. Melissa Grant lowered her eyes immediately after hearing it. The colonel turned sharply toward Keller now. You forced a decorated combat veteran onto his knees on public pavement with a firearm pointed at him. Keller swallowed hard. He reached suddenly. Walter answered softly before the officer could continue. I reached for registration papers. Silence again. Heavy silence. Because everyone standing there knew exactly how differently the situation would have unfolded if Walter looked different. One bystander shouted from traffic, "We got the whole thing on video!" More phones lifted immediately afterward. Keller's face lost color slowly as reality finally crashed into him. The public humiliation he forced onto Walter was now reversing violently back onto himself. The colonel stood beside Walter quietly now, while more military personnel arrived near the shoulder controlling the growing crowd and traffic backup. One younger officer whispered toward another after recognizing Walter's name from military records. "That's Hayes?" The other soldier nodded slowly. "He trained half our division commanders." The atmosphere shifted even deeper after that revelation spread quietly among the military group. Walter Hayes wasn't simply another retired veteran. He was respected leadership, decorated service, military history standing humiliated beside a highway. Melissa Grant finally spoke softly toward Walter. "Sir, I'm sorry." Walter studied her briefly before nodding once. Then his eyes moved back toward Keller standing silently near the patrol motorcycle. "Officer," Walter said quietly. Keller looked up slowly. "Do you know the hardest part about moments like this?" Keller said nothing. Walter glanced toward the phone, still recording everywhere around them. "It's not the gun." Silence. "It's realizing how quickly people decide who deserves one pointed at them." Nobody around the highway shoulder moved after hearing that, because again, nobody honestly could argue with it. By now, videos from the traffic stop had already exploded across social media. Drivers standing near the shoulder openly replayed clips showing Walter kneeling on the pavement while Keller screamed at him with a gun pointed inches from his face. The outrage spread almost instantly. Some bystanders openly confronted the officers now. "He did nothing wrong. That man served this country. Y'all humiliated him for no reason." Keller looked completely overwhelmed now, while supervisors arriving on scene quietly pulled him away from the crowd. But the damage already existed publicly forever. Walter slowly sat inside the back seat of one military SUV while medics checked his knees and blood pressure from the stress and heat. The colonel sat beside him quietly. "You should press charges." Walter stared out toward the highway silently for several moments. "I'm tired of fighting people," he answered softly. "I just wanted to drive home." The sentence crushed everyone nearby emotionally, because underneath the uniforms, sirens, cameras, and confrontation, the truth remained painfully simple. An old man driving home almost died publicly because somebody decided fear mattered more than patience. Nearly 2 hours later, traffic finally moved normally again beneath the darkening Texas sky. The construction zone looked ordinary once more on the surface. Cars passed quietly, police lights disappeared, but emotionally, the highway still carried the weight of what happened there earlier that afternoon. Walter Hayes sat quietly inside the military convoy vehicle, watching the sunset reflect across passing traffic, while his old pickup truck followed behind, escorted by military personnel. His knees still hurt from the pavement, his chest still tightened slightly replaying the gun pointed at his face. But somehow the deepest pain came from something else entirely: familiarity. Back on the roadside, Officer Keller sat alone inside a supervisor vehicle, while investigators reviewed body camera footage frame by frame. Every replay showed the same horrifying image: an elderly black veteran complying calmly, while a young officer escalated immediately toward fear and force. Meanwhile, online, millions of people watched the humiliation unfold through shaky phone videos recorded by strangers trapped in traffic. But the clip spreading fastest wasn't the gun itself. It was Walter's quiet question afterward. "Can I stand now?" Because somehow those 4 words revealed everything broken about the moment more clearly than screaming ever could. As the convoy disappeared into the warm evening horizon, the colonel quietly looked toward Walter beside him. "Sir, people are calling you a hero online already." Walter gave a tired little smile without looking away from the road ahead. No, he paused softly. Heroes shouldn't have to survive their own country first.